Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to be discussing the really hot topic right now in the CS landscape, and that is, of course, EliGE returning to Team Liquid after having been benched from FaZe a bit ago, and Jacob being brought into the team, and now Twistzz making his return to FaZe as well. We're kind of still waiting to see what comes of that. We now know what EliGE is up to, and he's going to be going back to Liquid. Now, normally, I wait until the team makes their official announcement before I make these sorts of videos, but at the time of recording this video, Liquid has not made that announcement yet. However, there's enough information out there to verify that this is certainly going to happen. Now, is Liquid going to make any other moves? I don't know. Is this a long-term move, or is this a trial thing where EliGE is just going to play out Liquid for the rest of this season in the Budapest Major, and then who knows what happens after that? I don't know. I don't know all the finer details, though I would expect Liquid would hope for this to be a long-term thing, and when I think about, EliGE's prospects, I'm not really sure what other teams he could, hope to join at the start of 2026. That would make sense. And I really do think that Liquid has some good pieces to put around him, and I think with maybe one other change, this team could legitimately be an international contender going forward, depending on how things work out. But before I dig too much deeper into all of this, folks, if you don't mind, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I would really appreciate that. We are still building towards that 5,000 subscriber mark, and we've really been grinding out the content this year, and I'll continue to do so. So if you wouldn't mind supporting me with a subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Leaving a like, leaving a comment, all these things to help feed the algorithm and all that jazz. But yeah, that is, just a little bit of housekeeping there. But now let's dig into this topic. Now, before we start kind of following the normal formula I do for these sorts of videos, where I kind of talk about what's been going on with Liquid and what's going on with EliGE, and then him kind of coming back and, kind of following that timeline, I did just want to kind of, legitimize why I'm making this video now before a official announcement from Liquid. That is because Liquid registered EliGE on a roster for an upcoming LAN tournament, for the Philadelphia Blocktober event that's coming up, and he has been listed on their roster for that tournament. A document is publicly available that you can go look at from this Philadelphia event, which clearly shows EliGE listed as one of the registered players. So if you look at the release roster list here, that's linked in the article. You can scroll down. You can look at Team Liquid. And there he is right there. Ultimate, NertZ, Shuhei, Naf, and EliGE. So this all but confirms things with him being on the registered player list. And so, with that said, it is pretty safe to say that this move is indeed happening. They also have another event that they're going to be playing before this Blocktober event, which is the Birch Cup, which is a small event in Poland that's running actually here in the next couple of days is when that starts, and then Blocktober will, of course, be later on in October. And one of the other big things that's kind of going on with this is that EliGE has to play, I believe, like 5 VRS qualified matches in order to be legitimate for Liquid's roster for the Budapest Major, which they just kind of recently put themselves in contention for. I mean, they were really in some struggles, as we'll talk about, to maybe not even make the Budapest Major, but they made some really big moves, I guess you could say, at Fisher Playground in the goodbye event, I guess you could say, for Twistzz, where they actually had a top 4 finish and acquired enough VRS points to really kind of put themselves in a spot where they should be making the Budapest Major now. But to make EliGE eligible with the VRS and stuff, apparently he needs to play these matches. And these are also opportunities to get more VRS points as well, to kind of really firmly establish themselves as making the major. And as far as what stage they'll start in, I'm not really sure about all that. But this is what the roster is supposed to look like at the end of the day, with EliGE being the only change noted. But let's kind of rewind a little bit now that we've kind of established this and talk about how we kind of got to this point. So essentially, we knew that something was going to happen when it was announced mid-tournament at the Fisher Playground 2 event that Twistzz would be leaving Team Liquid. And of course, this was announced because of the official roster lock rules for EPL that's coming up, that, registered rosters, had to be in order. And so obviously when teams are submitting their rosters, it had to be known then that Twistzz was going to be leaving Liquid and going to FaZe for that EPL registration process. And so because it was going to come out anyway, they went ahead and made the announcement, that Twistzz was going to be, leaving Team Liquid after being, back with them for a couple of years after, having played with them for many years and then going to FaZe and then coming back to Liquid. He's going back to FaZe. Apparently Twistzz only knows of 2 teams here lately in his career. And so this kind of announcement comes out and we were kind of wondering, well, what the heck? Where is he going? And we found out pretty quickly that Twistzz is making his shock return to FaZe. This was again announced during Fissure. And again, I believe this was due to, roster rules for registration for EPL, that this kind of had to come out in the middle of the tournament. It was very odd, which is also very odd because, like, if FaZe and Liquid are able to make these announcements about Twistzz in the middle of a tournament due to roster registration rules for a tournament, how is it that Liquid were unable to make an announcement about EliGE, yet we're getting a leak about him being on their registered roster for Fragadelphia Blocktober? Like, I'm sure that they probably wanted to do some type of special social media thing, or, maybe a video or some kind of really cool content to really hype up the return of EliGE to Liquid. Because, I mean, it is a big blockbuster move for them. Don't get me wrong. I can understand why they would want to put together some official promotional materials, maybe get him on site at like Liquid's HQ and film some content or whatever to do like a really big official announcement. I get that, but the timing of this was really tough. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Twistzz and FaZe in this video, because once we know who Twistzz is replacing on FaZe, I will make a separate video about that. Time me recording this and putting this out, this has not been announced yet. We just know that he has joined the team, and we don't know who for. It could be all kinds of different options, honestly. When you really look at it, apparently Rain stepping down and him coming in is the most popular option that people are discussing, but there's also been rumors that maybe some teams were interested in Frozen, as he's been their best performer. He's a very highly touted player, that maybe he could move on. Maybe they don't continue on with Jacob, even though it'd be kind of weird that they just grabbed him to bench him very suddenly already. But again, I'm not going to get too much in this. We're going to focus on the EliGE aspect. And to kind of do that, let's focus on, why did Liquid need a change? Well, for starters, I mean, it really is kind of right here in front of your face when you look at the results that this team has been putting up this year. And of course, this is the results that they have had with, this since Shuhei joined the team as the in-game leader, alongside Ultimate, who's been on the team for a while as the Opper. Obviously, NertZ had joined the team this year. Naf had the worst season of his life the first half of 2025. There was a lot of speculation that maybe he would get replaced. Even he came out and said that he thought he was going to get replaced and should get replaced because of his performance the first half of 2025, but they decided to keep him on the team. Now, I'm not sure if that's just because they couldn't find someone else, or if they really did believe in Naf again, or what that situation really was. We'll probably never really know. But this is the 5 they rolled with, the second half of this season, with Twistzz obviously involved with these 4. Now, obviously, they didn't have Shuhei the entire, first season of 2025, but, he comes in at PGL Bucharest and they go dead last place at that event. And while, they got a 5th, 6th place at Melbourne, and, they were able to at least make it to the Blast Bounty finals through the online qualification process, and they were able to do really well at their last event together with Twistzz, they pretty much struggled. And it goes further back than that, obviously. And if we look at things a little bit more deeply, one thing I can say about Liquid kind of throughout 2024, when they were having their struggles that year, and even some into kind of the first season of 2025, Liquid was kind of in just this position where they would seemingly always beat the teams kind of ranked at or below their level, but they could just never punch upwards to move up the rankings. And they also could never beat FaZe. So even though FaZe was not quite a top 5 or top 6 team for a lot of 2024, they still really much gatekeep Liquid from being able to get any further. FaZe beat them every single time. And, Liquid could never beat any of the top 5 teams in the world, and even struggled against some of the other top 10 teams, but they would always beat teams kind of ranked outside of the top 10. And so kind of to illustrate this, what I'm talking about is, if you look at kind of the second season of 2024 in the post-Copenhagen Major, they were obviously losing to Mouse Sports and losing to FaZe when, again, kind of as I was discussing, but they would beat a G2, they would beat a Furia, they would beat some of the smaller European teams like Monty, or, a team like FlyQuest. Astralis was really one of their only losses to a team that was kind of probably not a top team at the time, and maybe this NertZ loss as well at IM Dallas. But other than that, they would generally beat, VP. They even beat Navi a couple of times, obviously. They beat Pain, beat Furia, beat North American teams like Complexity, beat Ints, beat VP, but they just couldn't beat the top team. So when they played against a Vitality or a G2, and then again, they had that issue against FaZe, they would falter. And they did have this one win over Spirit, but generally would lose to, the top teams. Again, Vitality, again, losing to Navi, again, continuing to lose to FaZe, continuing to lose to G2 and Vitality. What would still, beat the Americas teams, kind of stay ahead in that pecking order. You go into the Shanghai Major, again, they're beating the teams they should be. It's just once they get against that top level opposition, they wouldn't do it. And so again, they weren't like totally embarrassing. They just couldn't punch upwards and beat those higher ranked teams to actually contend for tournaments, move their way up the pecking order. But really kind of what changed, throughout 2025, with this lineup that has Shuhei on it, and even going back further than this, is they were losing to teams all of a sudden they shouldn't lose to. Like, now they're losing to Virtus Pro. They're losing to a team like Legacy. Yeah, sure, Mongols is legit, fair enough. And yeah, they got some revenge against VP at Melbourne. And yeah, their really only other losses at Melbourne were to Mongols and Vitality, who are very elite teams. So, fair enough. But, now you're losing, a BO1 to Linvision at the Austin Major. Again, still struggling against FaZe, even though FaZe was super struggling this year. And just we're losing to Furia now with this new international lineup. Even lost to Gamer Legion, dropping maps to this crazy heroic project. Like things were really, really struggling, even when you look even deeper than just the on the surface end results. And when you're looking at this team's performance, I mean, it's just not good. Again, we already talked about how Naf had basically the worst season of his life at the first half of 2025. So yeah, I mean, when you're looking at Katowice 4 through this first season, really, really struggled. And while it's been a little bit better since he came back kind of at the early part of Cologne and did kind of well at the Future Playground event, he still has had his struggles, and there is still kind of a question mark around him long-term, in my opinion, on this team. But, that is kind of for another day, I guess you could say. At least he has made somewhat of a bounce back, and maybe he can continue to do so as they reconfigure the roster with EliGE coming in. However, the one that's really hurt is NertZ. Because to me, NertZ was a fantastic player when he came into Liquid. I thought this was a slam dunk move. For Liquid being criticized as much as they have been, and fairly so, for some of the management of this team, picking up NertZ, I thought, was indeed a slam dunk. I mean, this guy was a true star for Heroic in 2024. Really helped them in a big, big way before that core got sold off the Falcons and Shush went to NIP. Obviously having the playoff appearance at the Shanghai Major, having some other good finishes at some smaller lands and a top 4 finish at a bigger land at IEM Rio, was very clearly a star of that team. And obviously he had a history of being a star for Ents in the past as well, if you go back a couple of years. And when he first came to Liquid, the first event, Katowice, he continued to kind of show that same form that he had, with Heroic in 2024 that made him such a hot prospect. But then, I mean, the production just went down big time. And I think part of this was maybe the environment, switching between, Twistzz being a brand new IGL and being in that system. And then when they switched to Shuhei becoming the IGL and coaches switch ups. And also, I think the other big thing is when he was playing with Heroic, he didn't have to be the primary entry fragger of that team. Like Twistzz could be very much an entry fragger on that squad. Kixen in the IGL slot is more than willing to go in first and be an entry fragger in some cases. And, while NertZ is an aggressive playmaker, he plays a lot of positions that aggressors do like to play. When you think of like Ancient and Middle, just kind of as one example, or he was definitely a guy who could be involved in the mid control on Mirage, or, making those plays from underpassing the connector, or doing some of these, space taking roles. He didn't really seem to me like a true entry fragger like a Xantares or a Donk or Senzu, or like some of these guys who really do go for a crazy high yield of like true entry fragging. Like, to me, he was more of an aggressive space taker, an aggressive lurk type guy, almost akin to like an Eco kind of character, in my opinion. Flexible and could do some opening work, but Liquid, ever since Yakindar went to shit on the team, they never really had like a true entry guy, and I really feel like they tried to do that with NertZ, and I just don't think NertZ necessarily fits that very, very well. But he's playing on a team with Twistzz, who's not going to really be a pure entry. I mean, he can sometimes be a little bit aggressive, but he's definitely not known to be an entry or aggressive guy in his own right. Obviously, Naf is not that. Ultimate as an opper, while an aggressive one still, I mean, he's not going to be a true entry rifler, right? He's obviously your primary opper. And so when you think about some of these different guys who have been on Team Liquid alongside him, it just, to me, doesn't really suit well. And this is why I think actually bringing in someone like EliGE, as we'll talk about in a second, actually could really help out his production. And I'm just going to say it, man. I also think that Ultimate is going to have to be scrutinized here because, obviously he was kind of plucked out of obscurity and lacked a lot of experience. And so when he first came to Liquid, I was willing to give, a little bit of leeway on his performance, but he really hit the ground running, obviously, at his first events with Liquid in 2024. Hit a little bit of a rough patch, obviously, as, people started to kind of figure him out and counter him more, and he couldn't get away with, like, his super aggressive, like, crazy opping style that he was trying to go for. People started to catch on to it. He had to kind of temper down a little bit. But I thought after that adjustment period where he had a couple bad events, he bounced back and was able to get back to a pretty solid standing. I mean, you wouldn't call him one of the best hoppers in the world, but he ended 2024 on a pretty strong note and was definitely still, a fairly dependable guy who could do really good work. But the problem is now is when you kind of look throughout the rest of this year, he just seems like a very feast or famine player. Like, yeah, he can have the big games. Like, everybody will remember his performance against Esports, the Blast Austin Major, for instance. But then he can have games or whole series where he just goes completely missing. Right? I mean, if you just kind of scroll through some of these LAN matches that he's played throughout 2024, I mean, you can just see, so many games or whole series against top-level opposition where he is just completely off the charts. And, it's one of those things where I don't know if, having more time with Shuhei and the coach Flashy is going to maybe help kind of figure out how to use him properly or what. But I'll tell you this, if this team doesn't work out with the EliGE coming in for Twistzz, if this 5, does not pan out, the next person to change is going to have to be Ultimate. And unfortunately, I don't know who Liquid can get, who makes sense. Like, I obviously like going after like a simple type character would be a great move. I honestly think Dexter is highly underrated and could be a cool international signing for an Opper. Hell, if you want to take a gamble and you want to pick up an America's Opper, that maybe try to think about, what VRS system you're going to qualify through, whether it be Americas or Europe. You got EliGE, you got an access to America's players. Go get an America's Opper. Doesn't have to be North American. You got like Try who, as an Opper in the America scene that you can maybe think about. But yeah, I do kind of wonder about this a little bit. And, I mean, this team also just doesn't really have any functioning map pool. I mean, the only map that they have a positive win rate on is Ancient. Everything else is just completely in the dumps. So, not great results. Players struggling in individual form. No real map pool. A lot of question marks around Shuhei as an in-game leader now. A lot of question marks about whether this coaching change at Flashy is going to work. Stars that we know who can be really good, like NertZ, struggling. All these things have just been a recipe for disaster, and the solution that Liquid is trying to do to solve this is bringing in EliGE. And I think bringing in EliGE does make a heck of a lot of sense when you really think about it. He is still one of the best aggressive riflers in the world. Even on a struggling phase that he played on this year, he was still, statistically speaking, I think the second best entry rifler behind Donk. And obviously Donk is a freaking phenom, and he's always going to be at the top of the charts, and there's always going to be a pretty decent gulf in statistics between himself and the next guy below him when it comes to entry rifling. But EliGE is one of the guys who was going for a very high amount of opening tips on the T side, as he should as an entry type character. And he had an over 50% success rate for the majority of this year. And obviously he's put up numbers like that, in complexity in the past, as well as their entry rifler. He's always been one of the top entry riflers for quite some time. Obviously you're going to put Donk ahead of him, but he is right up there, like with his Antares. He puts up numbers that are better than that of like a Flames or a Xertion if you're talking about entries in some of these teams. He's right up there with like a Zenzu as well, or even performs better than him. So, I mean, he really is like one of those top 3 entry guys. It's like him, Donk, and Xantares a lot of the time, or through a lot of last year at least, and through even a lot of this year as well, as far as just like looking at it statistically speaking. And while he did have some CT struggles on phase, no doubt, there was a lot of moving parts on that team with them shuffling up the CT roles. When Anubis was still in the map pool, that came up quite a lot, on who was like the A anchor and who was playing what. Obviously, him and Rain conflicted on Yard, on Nuke. So there was a lot of that as well, and really that whole team just didn't seem to really mesh together well, and so I'm sure that plays into it a lot as well. But EliGE is still a very high-level player, and I think coming into a team like Liquid makes a lot of sense for both parties. For the Liquid side of things, like, you are getting a star rifler on your team who is a proven guy who has had a ton of success in his career. He's done a lot of it for you, obviously. I mean, this guy played on Liquid from like early 2015 to mid 2023 when he finally departed to go to Complexity to play for them for 2 years before going to FaZe, obviously. And with Liquid, he had tons of success through kind of different lineups and through different stints of time. For the first things you're going to think about are the majors that he played in 2016, where he had the top 4 finish at MLG Columbus, and he had the second place finish at the Cologne major that year. Obviously, another period you're going to think about is 2019, where they had the Intel Grand Slam and had a ton of wins and were doing very well. And then even the year before that, 2018, they were second fiddle to a Strauss, but we're still very much a top team in the world, making, really deep runs in a lot of big tournaments. And so, he has had a lot of success in those 8 years with Liquid before going to Cole and going to FaZe. And so this is a big homecoming that Liquid can be happy about. And it comes at just the right time when the team is struggling and is in need of more consistent star firepower. And in a particular role and style that the team desperately needs, an entry rifler, a true guy who can go out there first few on T-side and create space, create openings, have entry success, win those opening duels, and give your team starts to rounds. And this is absolutely massive. And what it'll do, I think personally, is it will kind of allow everyone else to pretty much stay where they're at. Like Na's still going to be the more passive extremity rifler and anchor type guy on the team. Shuhei is still the IGL. Ultimate is still the Opper. And what I think this is also going to do is allow NertZ to slot into roles that make a little bit more sense for him. It doesn't have to be a pure entry. He can still be at times an aggressive playmaker. Obviously, a lot of the most successful teams out there have multiple guys who can be aggressors. For Vitality, it's Apex, Flames, or Ziwu can be an aggressive option. For Mongols, it can be Blitz as an opening guy, as an IGL, and Techno can still do some entry work as well as Senzu, obviously. Spirit is trying to solve this. They have Donk, and for a while they didn't have another guy, and so they're looking to Tanir to be like an aggressive playmaker in his own right in kind of the aggressive extremity rifler positions. Obviously, Furia has Yakindar as like the pure entry, but Fallen can go for some openings as well with the rifle. Queserado can play some more active positions as well. And so these are just kind of some examples of some of the top teams right now in the rankings who feature players who have, multiple players rather that have aggressive tendencies that can really help out. And so you can still have NertZ be a guy who can go for like aggro alerts and for some space taking, but now you have EliGE who can be actually your true entry. And so when I think about it, it's like now you can pair up EliGE and, NertZ to double up middle on Ancient, or, NertZ can aggro lurk mid on Ancient while EliGE adds to the B attack on like a 1-4 B split or something on Ancient T side. On DusT 2, NertZ can maybe be more of like a long A guy who kind of pick his battles or when he wants to come out, while EliGE is kind of the main mid character. Or you could stack them together, obviously, when you go for certain like heavy mid B splits or mid attacks or cat plays, things of that nature. Obviously on Inferno, one of them can be your B aggressor, or one of them is kind of playing the mid bowler position, so you can kind of spread out the responsibility. And the list kind of goes on and on. I'm not going to get too into the weeds, but the reality is it'll give Liquid an added aggressive option that can be a pure entry and take a little bit of the load off of NertZ having to play that role and allow him to slot more into that aggressive lurky kind of playmaking role that he was kind of playing on Heroic, when he could trust in guys like Twistzz and Kixen to do pure entrying when need be. And there will be certain times where he's just in the right place and right time to be that guy, and he can be that guy. But I just think it'll take a little bit of the load off of him as well, and it'll just really help shake things down. Now, will this completely solve all of Liquid's problems? No. I think we still have to see how Shuhei pans out long term. I think when he was signed, it made a lot of sense. I mean, obviously that guy had a ton of success on Mousesports as an IGL in 2024, and obviously he had done well with Gamer Legion prior to that. I think we still need to give Flashy more time. And kind of a neat side note to kind of mention in all of this is that Flashy and EliGE have somewhat of a relationship from what I understand. I think this was mentioned in the Talking Counter podcast that Sponge, Moses, and Yanko do, that Flashy had been a coach in the past for FlyQuest Red and CLG Red, which Goose Breeder was a player on those teams at different points in time, and is the partner, girlfriend, not really sure what the official wording is there, of EliGE. And so they had conversations in the past about Counter-Strike, obviously, because EliGE is a very studious guy when it comes to CS, has a very big mind for the game and is always learning and has high work ethic. And Flashy being a guy working and coaching, that there was some conversations there. And so there's already maybe a bit of a relationship to be had between Flashy as a coach and EliGE as a player, and hopefully they can kind of get on the same page. And I know EliGE likes things to be a bit more structured and for there to be more of a system, and Flashy hopefully can kind of help provide that with Shuhei as an IGL. And again, I think that now we have to just kind of see how it plays out, because if this doesn't work out, the questions will be Ultimate as the opper of this team long term. I think that is probably a role that's going to have to get looked at, potentially. I know a lot of people really like Ultimate because when he does pop off, it looks really good. And he is, a flashy playmaking opper when he's on. But he's just so hot or cold. And I am a little bit concerned about that long term at this point. I think that's probably the next move that gets made if Liquid doesn't work out after this move. And then after that, you are going to have to consider, like, is it time for Naf to move on? Is he going to be able to actually recover? That's going to be a question mark there. And then after that, then you have to kind of start thinking, like, is Shuhei actually the right IGL for this team? I think you're a few steps away from that. But either way, like, the core of having a good coach in Flashy, if you can actually develop into a top coach, having the combo of Shuhei, NertZ, and EliGE, that is a trio that you can just play around for a long time, in my opinion. Like, that is just, a proven IGL in Shuhei, an entry rifle star CT player in EliGE, and then NertZ, who is like an extremity playmaker. Like, that is just a brilliant combo to build around long term, no matter what happens with this version of the lineup. But hopefully this will at least kind of get them started in the right direction. And when you're thinking about it from EliGE's angle, I just really don't know where else he would go. When you're looking at the other teams out there, like, obviously Vitality's not going to make a change, right? Like, even though in, like, some hypothetical world, if everyone got along and we're on the same page, like, could, in theory, EliGE be a stronger entry than Flames? Yeah, maybe. But Flames is still really fucking good. This team is really fucking good. And so obviously, I'm not calling for that change or expecting anything like that to happen, right? So that's off the table. Obviously, Mongols and Spirit are off the table. Mouse could be interesting, but I really doubt it. Like, I don't really see that being a fit. And then you kind of just keep going down, and, like, unless he came in for Malbs on G2 or something like that, which, again, I think that this team is still kind of cooking. Like, they just got, Hunter in the IGL slot. They just got Sun Pius and Mattis. Like, they still are really, working with that team. Obviously on Falcons, they already have Kiyosuke, so that doesn't really make sense. Aurora, obviously, a fully Turkish team, that doesn't make sense. The only other one that really makes sense is, like, if he went to Navi for EMA, which was something that was kind of talked about, and obviously playing underneath a very structured system by their coach Blade would seem like a match made in heaven, but they kind of already made their, move with Makaze coming into the team to play a lot of the roles that EliGE would want to play. And so I'm not really sure if that's really a thing. And obviously you already tried it out with FaZe, that didn't work out. And so, yeah, Liquid kind of is the team that makes sense at that point when you're kind of going through the rankings. And so, yeah, that's going to do it for this video. Definitely it's a move that we had heard rumors about, but then it kind of died off, but now it's kind of come back. Now it's all but official with the fact that Liquid registered him as a player on their roster for an upcoming LAN. So by the time I release this video, maybe it will have already been officially announced even as well. But what I really think about this is, yes, Liquid needed to make a move. Clearly, they had been struggling for quite some time. I think that they do have some really good pieces in Shuhei and NertZ in particular. And even though NertZ has been struggling individually, I think that he can get back to a very high level if he gets put in roles that make more sense for him, and he gets a little bit of the weight lifted off his shoulders of not being the only aggressive guy on the team. And EliGE really does provide that. And EliGE is still a very proven high-level aggressive rifler. And so that combination of an experienced IGL and Shuhei, NertZ being able to get back to a place that's probably a bit more comfortable for him, EliGE coming in to be their aggressive playmaker and getting those star spots, like, that is a core that can do something. And yes, there's still going to be question marks about Ultimate. Yes, there's still going to be question marks about NAF. Yes, Flashy's still kind of an unproven coach, right, in the head coach position. And so there's a lot of other things that you are going to be questioning. But the reality is that this is the first step in the right direction. And I do think bringing in Shuhei and NertZ were good moves by Team Liquid. It seems like they are starting to put the pieces together. It's just they weren't getting the results. Like, they would get close games. They would at times look, they gave Vitality even some close games with their previous lineup. Like, they looked like they could be something, but they just never actually materialized it. Hopefully this will actually get them in the right way. And then for EliGE, this is a chance to really kind of be the guy again for a team that hopefully you can sync up, mentality-wise with Shuhei and, Flashy, a coach that he has some level of experience with, not working together directly on the same team, but at least knowing each other, right? And so, yeah, this could be a fantastic move on all fronts. It also makes sense financially as well, because this could just be kind of a contract swap or trade between Liquid and FaZe where no big buyouts have to be involved. And so when you think it from that perspective, it also makes sense. And so, yeah, I'll be really curious to see how it plays out. Obviously, it'd be great to see it play out nicely, because it'd be cool to see Liquid back into the mix again. I mean, we already have a lot of parity in the scene. Spirit winning some events, Moggles winning an event, G2 winning an event. Obviously, we just had Furio win an event as well. You know, Vitality, while they haven't won an event yet this season, they're still certainly a top team in the world. Like, they're consistently placing in the top 4 still. And so if you could just add another contender to that mix, it just makes things more and more interesting in the scene, which is always a lot of fun. But anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you folks enjoyed it. If you did, please follow, subscribe, like, and I'll catch you on the next one.